Okay, so some of you may ask, how can someone be rich with bird drops? It wasn't just one person, but a whole country. Let me explain. 40 years ago, Nauru was the richest country in the world. There was no unemployment, no taxes, and all the social services were covered. After a couple years, corruption raised and the country was in a downfall. And why was that? Stay here to learn how this country became one of the poorest and fattest countries in the world. Nauru is a country in Oceania. It is 4,000 kilometers away from the northeast of Australia and 42 kilometers away from the equator. It only has 21 square kilometers. To walk around the island, you will need about 3 hours, which is hilarious. It's bigger than Monaco and the city of the Vatican. It has only 11,000 people. Something crazy about this country is that there are no cities and has 14 districts. There is no capital of the country, but the government is located in Yaren. So a lot of people assume that the capital of the country is Yaren, but officially it isn't. So, how this small and isolated country became one of the richest countries in the world. The resources that made rich this country were bird drops. I'm not actually kidding. Actually, it's phosphate. Both are correct. It is believed that this happened because of the process that happened in this territory. The geologists say this island went underwater for a couple of times, and this helped the island to catch sea life who stayed at the surf. The birds collaborated in this process when they were doing the bird drops on top of the island for thousands of years. The massive amount of bird drops and the sea life made a material called guano, which helps to create phosphate rocks. This material is highly used in agriculture because it works as a fertilizer. There were traditionally 12 tribes on Nauru, which are represented in the 12 pointed stars of the nation flag. The introduction of firearms and alcohol destroyed the peaceful coexistence of the 12 tribes of the island. A 10-year internal war began in 1878 and resulted in a massive reduction of the population from 1,400 people to around 900. The echoes of this war are still heard nowadays. Ultimately, alcohol was banned and some arms were confiscated. The annexation of Nauru by Germany halted the self-destruction of the island through firearms and alcohol. Although the Nauruans lost control of the island and their fate for nearly 80 years. After German annexation, King Aida, or however you want to call him, retook the throne. In 1914, Germany lost possession of the island in a bloodless transfer of power to Australia. The Japanese troops occupied Nauru on 1942, and it took 3 years for the Japanese troops to leave the island. Let's say this powerful nation has been through rough times during these times. The wealth of this island discovered at the beginnings of the 20th century. In 1968, Nauru was able to gain independence from Australia. From there, with all the rich natural resources, the big process of the wealth of this nation started to pump. In the decade of the 70s and the beginnings of the 80s, it was at the top of earnings around the world, with a PBI per capita of $50,000 per year, which is a lot. This wealth was not equally distributed, but just a few were rich who had the money. Fortunately, the Nauruan didn't have to pay taxes, they had no unemployment, they had free education, free healthcare, and free public transport. The best students were sent to Australia, so that was pretty good for them. This good and rich situation for the country was temporary, and the problems of the island started sooner than later. An infamous phrase from this island is, "Tomorrow will take care of itself," but the resources and the wealth started to wear out. In the 90s, the bad luck of Nauru started with corruption and bad administration. The country had to make drastic changes. All the investments on the island were sold, all the properties from Australia and the only airplane that connected with this island were sold. The politicians started to sell their votes in the General Assembly of the United Nations to international enterprises. Then they decided to become a tax haven, which did not work out. Then the politicians saw another opportunity to make more money, the recognition of sovereign states for some cash. For example, Abkhazia, a territory from Georgia that wants to gain independence. The states who recognize this state are Russia, Venezuela, and of course our friend Hungary for cash. Nauru was there. They even got in the middle of the conflict between Taiwan and China, changing of side depending on which commercial activity will benefit them the most. But not only this happened. Australia didn't want to have refugees, so they sent them to Nauru while they were studying the case of each political asylum scenario. From 2013, these people are sent to the detention centers while Australia evaluates if they give or not asylum. A lot of people who ask for asylum in these countries are escaping from war inside their countries. The problem is that they can spend years in this detention center with horrible living conditions. Some of the biggest human organizations were talking about the diseases spread around in these detention centers. Nowadays, we can talk about good things about Nauru. Well, actually, let's say something good and something bad, because why not? Let's give the good news first. It is a country COVID-19 free. Now let's give the bad news. It is the country with the most obese people in the world. 95% of the population is overweight, which is nuts, and 61% of the Nauruan are obese. This happened because in the years when they had money, they decided to import all the junk food from the first world countries to this island, and they started to eat a lot of burgers and processed food. They stopped to hunt fish and got obese. For everyone who wants to visit this island, you won't need a hoodie, and it's better if you go with your swimsuit, because there has never been a time when this country had less than 20 Celsius or 68 Fahrenheit. But this island only has 2 hotels, and this powerful nation doesn't have a lot of attractions for the tourists. It only has a beautiful ocean at your mercy. Thank you for watching the video. Would you like to go to this island and enjoy the beaches? What is the funniest fact from this island you have found in this video? If you like the content from this video, you can subscribe.